Hey, discerned listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Big Ed video. Megan said, thank you for talking about how it's harder to provide for the needs of all your kids when you have many kids. I don't know why big families are so romanticized. I have many siblings, and we were raised by a single parent. We've all struggled with mental health issues, and I believe this is part of the reason. Yeah, I mean, I guess we do kind of romanticize large families. And I'm not saying that when there's a lot of kids, it's automatically going to result in neglect of the children, but it raises the likelihood because we all understand that there's only so much time a parent can spend with each child, taking care of them, monitoring them, supervising them, loving them, attuning to them. And when there are 15 kids, we all understand that the capacity of the parents, particularly if it's single parent, to attune. I mean, even when you have just one kid, it's a lot of work. There's especially emotionally, and so imagine having 15 kids. And I think that in the past we saw larger families because there was a balance between attention and attunement with survival of the family, with lots of labor to work on the farm. My both sides of my family, my Japanese and my white side of the family, are farmers in the United States and would have a lot of kids because they all worked for free on the farm, and that would all contribute to the family being able to survive and eat food. So there was a trade-off there, but now that we don't have to necessarily make that choice, having fewer kids, I think, gives us an easier time attuning. Now, could you have 5 kids and attune to all the kids? Yeah, potentially. But if your life is pretty stressed out already, having a lot of kids just raises the risk. It doesn't automatically. But anyway, Kia says, I have 15 older siblings and can agree to the neglect. I really think people shouldn't have more kids than they can care for. Yeah. Wyatt says, I wonder if Ed's mom has enabled him and boosted his ego his entire life because of his disability, maybe out of fear or self-blame. She has always boosted him, but never corrected him and been honest about his responsibilities in life, etc., because she didn't want him to feel different or less than, maybe? Yeah, that's a possibility. It's hard to know, but it wouldn't be the first time that happened. RP says, it's interesting how Ed seems to be focused on age as the reason why his past relationships failed, when it has to do with his maladaptive patterns and that he is currently working on in therapy. It's hard to know what he's working on in therapy. Therapy takes a long time. Some therapists aren't so great. Sometimes the client isn't on board with really the things they should be working on. So we'll see. It's also possible that he's just growing as a result of this show, or even just the result of his relationships. I think he said that he got married, had his child, Tiffany is her name, 28 years ago or something. And then after the divorce, which was pretty quick, he didn't date at all. And so one could think of him as like a 20-year-old who is exploring relationships and trying to manage empathy versus assertiveness, that kind of thing. And maybe he'll grow, who knows? But yeah, it is interesting that he's focusing on age. And I think I said this in the video, or maybe if I didn't, it's easier to focus on a factor that doesn't blame the self, right? The sun was in my eyes. That's why I couldn't catch the ball, instead of I'm just a terrible baseball player. Mia says, I think what is missing in this video with Big Ed is that men dating exclusively younger women is a trope in our society. It's not just for rare guys on the narcissistic personality disorder spectrum. A young and beautiful woman is highly regarded by men, not because of their own inherent power, but because of the prestige that she can give to the man. Yeah, and people who are narcissistically oriented are more likely to seek that outward narcissistic supply of, look at how beautiful this and young this woman is next to me. That means that I am also awesome. But yeah, absolutely. And I didn't read your whole comment, but you talked about the James Bond movies and even the more recent ones with Daniel Craig, who is, I think, in his 60s, and with very young women who he is, paired up with. And James Bond isn't the only movie that does this. Plenty of movies do it. And yeah, it's an issue, and there's a lot of different twists and turns to this. The sexism of once a woman passes a certain age of sometimes just like the age of 30 or 35, she's now completely irrelevant as a human being. And that young women are pretty much only prized because of how they look and their sexual objectivity, relevance, because of our sexism and the male orientation of our society. I could go on, and Ed might be suffering from that indoctrination. Who knows? Jennifer says, Ed did mention in a confessional for 90 Day that his father was very strict and they went to church each week. I cannot recall which season or episode. Yeah, there's some like offshoots from 90 Day Fiancé that I hear about that I don't think I've seen, and maybe this is from one of those. And that's interesting. I don't remember seeing that. So his father was very strict. Or maybe we did see that like at the beginning of Single Life season 1. Anyway, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised about that. What does that say? Is that like good kind of strict or bad kind of strict? Hard to know. Carter says, I have struggled with chronic anxiety for a while. I started medical school in August, and my school offers unlimited free therapy. I'm happy to say that I'm in therapy for the first time ever. I've always been a huge proponent of therapy, but I've never felt confident enough to go myself. So thank you, Dr. Honda, for helping normalize therapy for all people. I hope you see this and know that your videos and my awesome school are helping me get the help that I needed. Well, that's great, Carter. And by the way, I don't always read these comments, the positive ones, the ones that are just being nice to me, because I don't know, I feel like a video where I just do that would be self-indulgent and boring. And so, if you write a comment, in all likelihood, I'm seeing it. But occasionally I like to highlight, someone that's saying, and I know a lot of you will say that, and I don't always read those comments, people saying that they're going to therapy now, and I'm celebrating with you for sure. My advice is go to therapy. That's great. But, evaluate over the first 5 sessions if this is a good match. Maybe jumping ship is the way to go. There's nothing unusual about going to a therapist and within, a little bit of time going, I don't know if, I've done that before. I've gone to a therapist and 5 sessions in, I was just like, no, I'm not vibing with this therapist at all. I don't feel like he understands me. I don't really feel enhanced by our sessions. So I found another therapist. The Travis Scott episode that I did, it wasn't a video, it was just audio. Ash says, I think what made this tragedy, the Travis Scott Astroworld, if listen to the whole episode on that or just Google it. I think what made it was a tragedy in which a lot of young people died at a concert because of essentially lack of planning at the venue, and perhaps because of the performing artist. Travis Scott was either complacent or negligent or allegedly encouraging, who knows, of the violence that, or the factors that led to the death of people at the concert. They were essentially trampled. I think what made this tragedy seem particularly nefarious is how Travis Scott is marketed to children, and that the theme of this concert was like a carnival. Why were children granted entry to an event that is known for its violence and rage? Why were children on the posters as a part of the advertisement? This, along with many other details about the organization of the concert, suggests that it was set up to elicit as much chaos as possible, which is fine, but again, why involve children? I think the reason this has traumatized people and made them question their faith in humanity is because if no significant punishment is enforced, then it feels like we've entered a realm of no limits. Yeah. Gigi says, I saw the whole video of the concert of Travis Scott, and it's been very triggering for me. Thank you, Dr. Honda. You are the first person that I feel actually validates my feelings. Oh, well, good. I'm glad. Maria says, I appreciated hearing your thoughts on this situation. I think Maria was the one who emailed in. I appreciated hearing your thoughts on the situation. I'll admit faith in humanity. So Maria was saying, I think I'm losing my faith in humanity. And I was like, I get that, but I think there's reason to continue whatever level of faith you had prior to this event. I'll admit faith in humanity, when I mentioned that, might have been a bit dramatic in my phrasing. At this time, it appears that someone may have made choices that prioritizes profits over people. I'll hold off on judgment until the investigation is complete, but that is a discouraging thought. Yeah, I mean, the capitalistic society that values capital over humans. We don't live in a humanistic society. We live in a economically oriented society. I mean, just think about what happened when the pandemic started. It was all about, with certain people, it's all about the economy, which is, important, of course. And there are things that really stem from that are potentially humanistic. When the economy suffers, usually the poor suffer and people start dying and starving and having to turn perhaps to crime to actually, make ends meet. So it's perhaps, slightly humanistic to care about the economy, but it was all about, we got to get the stock market back. We got to get unemployment, and instead of people are dying, right? And what good is an economy if everyone's dead? Or 3% of the population dies, millions of people die. So yeah, our society is completely oriented towards profit and capital, and not oriented towards human beings. Our government is oriented towards capital. I mean, corporations are people, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. There's ways to orient your society in a capitalistic, economic, profit-oriented way that also includes the notion that humans matter. But we're not quite there yet, especially when it comes to future humans. Like right now, we're making profit upon profit upon profit. Meanwhile, we are destroying the atmosphere and our planet because we don't care enough about people of the future. Now, maybe we're not ruining the planet. Maybe we'll pull back. Maybe there'll be some technological advance or something. But we're definitely rolling the dice. It'd be like with your kids or something. You're just like, I'm not going to put money aside for college. I'm not going to invest in their future because, maybe they'll figure it out. It's like, do you really want to roll those dice? Why wouldn't you care to think about the future? So yeah, this example is a stark, very concrete example of how our society, perhaps including Travis Scott and his organization, value profits over human lives. Ariella and Benny episodes, they're me reacting to some events that happened a while ago. Andrea says, "Thank you for bringing up your experience in Mexico and how Americans distrust Mexican medicine." Yeah, so I was talking about how this is when Ariella was wanting to go back to the States, and Benny was like, "No, there's doctors here." And, I didn't know the situation that they're in. But I was saying, I wonder if Ariel is falling into a trap of just assuming that Ethiopia has terrible medicine. And in the video, I said, I don't know the state of medicine in Ethiopia, but I do know that Americans just sometimes blanketly assume that the American medical system is the only one, and that everything else is terrible, and there's no intelligent, educated, capable physicians except for the United States, which is of course a ridiculous notion. And I brought up this experience I had years ago. I was in Mexico City, and there's this huge university there and a medical school, and if you saw it, it just looks, whoa, like there's research going on here. And of course, to Americans, that doesn't compute, because to a lot of Americans, Mexico is just a poor third world country that doesn't have anything in terms of technology or medical advances or anything. And so I was talking about that. And so Andrea says, "Thank you for bringing up your experience in Mexico and how Americans distrust American medicine. I grew up in the border town in Arizona and would literally see hundreds of Americans crossing the border to get cheap medical and dental care in Mexico for a fourth the price of what they would pay here in the States. Despite that, a lot of people still think Mexico is some backwards country that is inferior to the U.S. in every way. That couldn't be further from the truth. I'm sure it's the same in Ethiopia, and they could have found a good doctor if Ari had actually tried to stay for Avi's procedure." Yeah. I mean, we don't know, because it's just, I don't know their situation. Gogurt to Go says, "I'm a U.S. doctor who has practiced or trained and been a patient in 3 different countries and done 2 shorter international rotations. I don't typically like talking about medical stuff in a public forum on YouTube, but I want to address the surgery question given that a lot of comments are trashing the U.S. system. Oh, and I didn't know that. So apparently a lot of people in the comment section were saying, yeah, and another thing, the U.S. system has a lot of things wrong with it, which it does, and Gogurt to Go is, I think, acknowledging it. There's a lot to criticize about the structure, cost, and inequity of the U.S. system, but at the level of individual outcomes, we do pretty well. There is a big difference between having surgery in a developed country versus a developing nation, and it has nothing to do with the competence of the providers and everything to do with the infrastructure and resource limitations. Rates of surgical site infections are typically higher in developing nations. If something goes seriously wrong during surgery, you're less likely to have the same level of equipment and capacity to address it, and it's really, really scary to be a patient outside your country in a healthcare system that you don't understand. I have traveled extensively. My training focuses on international medicine. I have huge respect for the colleagues in other countries. All that being said, if I needed an elective procedure, I would also want it done in the U.S. I get that the main issue is how they talk to and support each other, Ari and Benny, through these questions. I also have a lot of sympathy for Biniam and his fears, but there are valid reasons to want the procedure done in the United States. Oh, well, thank you. Gogurt to Go, you've commented a lot, and so it's great to get to know a little detail about yourself, or a number of details. And if you have other medical advice, you might be, one of the few medical professionals in the comments section. So if there's anything that we're ever talking about, you're like, medical professional here, I'd love to hear your opinion. It'd be like, consulting professionals. Reiko says, I grew up in Japan and moved to Canada on my own 16 years ago. By the way, I have a number of relatives close to me in my family named Reiko. It's a beautiful Japanese first name. I grew up in Japan and moved to Canada on my own 16 years ago. I was so used to the Japanese medical and dental care system, and it took me years to start going to Canadian dentists, even haircuts. I would wait for my chance to go visit my parents back in Tokyo to get my hair cut or my teeth checked. It's not that I'm xenophobic about Canada. It just takes a long time to get used to living in a new country. Well, thank you for that, Reiko. That definitely adds, which I could totally relate to. I've been to Japan, and I will say that I had a brief I almost needed to go to a physician, a medical professional in Japan. I actually didn't need to in the end, and I remember saying well, if I had to go to the doctor, what do I do? And I was talking with my friend who knew all about the Japanese medical system, and he was explaining it to me, and I was just like, what? I don't understand. It just seemed obviously it's a completely different culture, different country, very different medical system. And I remember just being like, I hope I don't need to go to a physician until I go home. Not because I think Japanese physicians were bad, but it just seemed like the way you navigate it was just completely different. So it makes sense that a Japanese person coming to Canada or a United States person going to Ethiopia would have similar feelings, absolutely. And what I've been saying from the beginning is there's nothing wrong with Ari being like, look, this is my baby. I don't want to take any chances. I know the system in the United States. My parents work in the medical field. They have connections. Totally fine. How do you talk with each other? How do you work it out? Cam says, I'm so interested in why Benny decided to date another American white woman. Why did he get her pregnant? Why did they get engaged? Does he have difficulty meeting women in Ethiopia? Yeah, it is definitely a question that would be relevant because, it's already done. But if this didn't work out, God forbid, then hopefully he really looks at the sort of choices he makes when he decides to not only date, but, pursue, ongoing long-term relationships with people. Because if this doesn't work out and he dates yet another American or just a woman from another country, it'd just be like, dude, what are you glutton for punishment kind of thing? And then we start wondering about projective identification and repetition compulsion and recreating relationships, because, we do know that he was abandoned by his parents through death. That, the parents didn't do it on purpose, of course, but it feels like an abandonment. And sometimes when we have that in our history, we will set up situations in our we'll make choices subconsciously to recreate that through, and then he gets abandoned again. Darcy, this is I was reacting to when Darcy and Stacy were singing their song. Chris says, quoting me, art is art, good for them. Video ends abruptly. Yeah, so I was watching them sing their song, and I had all these thoughts running through my mind, and I just thought, look, art is art, good for them, and then I'll just edit the video. Good for you, Dr. Kirk, just walk away. Yeah. Grace says, I get a bit frustrated hearing relaxation recommended everywhere. So in the video, there was talk, I think, wasn't Darcy talking about how she's learning relaxation? And I was like, I don't know if that's going to address it. It's fine for relaxation is great, but I can't imagine that it's going to solve the problem. Grace says, I get a bit frustrated hearing relaxation recommended everywhere because it's actually a trigger for me. I tried for years to make meditation and relaxation exercises work for me, just to find that it made me more stressed and even brought on panic attacks or increased dissociation. I try to heal in other ways, like healing relational traumas through corrective experiences instead. Yeah, absolutely, Grace. Your experience is actually common. In research, we find that there's a pretty good percentage of people who will do meditation and relaxation, and it's actually harmful to them. Now, a lot of, shall I say, like religious followers of meditation and relaxation will say, well, you're not doing it right. And it's like, no, you can't do that to someone. You can't say, the reason why this treatment is failing is because of you, right? You can't give someone Prozac and their depression gets worse, which can happen, and say, well, you weren't using the treatment right. That might be an issue when it comes to behavioral treatment like meditation, but often it's, and research shows that when people actually strictly follow the protocol of meditation, their anxiety goes up and their dissociation goes up. It's documented. There's a percentage of people that's what, and when you say that, it's like heresy to meditation, religious followers. They're just like religiously following meditation and mindfulness. And it's great. A lot of research shows mindfulness and meditation can benefit some people for sure. How much of the benefit? It varies from person to person. There are a lot of people where it doesn't do anything, and there's a percentage of people where it actually harms them. And I actually did a recent Tougher Bluff. If you don't know, well, I do it on YouTube, right? I will put my Tuesday Tougher Bluffs on YouTube. It's a true or false research-based question. And I think a couple months ago, I bluffed a lot of people by saying that meditation didn't have any negative outcomes, but it absolutely can for some people. And it's like apocryphal. Like, what are you talking about? Like, meditation is 100% good for everyone. Mindfulness is beautiful, wonderful. And it's like, yeah, for some, absolutely. And if it works for you, then absolutely do it. And, proselytize the benefits to other people, but understand that not everyone reacts that way. For some people, when they slow their mind down and they focus on something, it triggers something in them that actually causes anxiety, causes association. And so it's something that I've been bumping up against for my entire career. I learned about mindfulness during graduate school 25 years ago and found it to be nice, but I was always like, it's not really for me. There's other ways that I try, like general relaxation. Like sometimes I'll just sit there and relax my neck and stretch and just take a deep breath and that sort of thing. I think that's universally helpful to people, but mindfulness specifically, and there's different kinds of mindfulness and meditation, of course, but yeah, Grace, there's nothing unusual about your reaction, and you're completely justified in being like, I don't understand why everyone talks about mindfulness as like this universal cure, and like, it didn't work for me. Absolutely. And even in my industry, I find that people don't understand the research. Mike and Natalie, in which they were fighting about alcohol, Lucas says, whenever Dr. Honda talks about pot, I'm always like, oh no, is he disappointed in me? But then I remember he lives in the weed capital of America, and I feel a little bit better, LOL. Yeah. So I remember experiencing this with Dr. Drew, when I would listen to him 20, 30 years ago. And I would find that people would call into his radio show with Adam Carolla, and people would be like, is it okay that I smoke weed on the weekend? And he's an addiction specialist, so he's particular. He's not in the same field as I am. But a lot of times, Dr. Drew would be like, look, if you want to smoke pot every now and then, or even every day, that's between you and yourself. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not here to tell you that there's something wrong with you or that you're weak or something. If you have a problem with it, then you benefit by taking a look at that for your own life. But I'm not like preaching sobriety to people. I'm not like someone. That's not like a moral decision. I'm not like telling everyone that they can't use substances if they want to. And the same goes for me. That I get, when have I ever said that it's wrong to smoke pot? But somehow some people, and Lucas, I think you had a knee-jerk reaction along these lines and then self-corrected. But there's this projection that people have, and I think it's their own internal shaming of themselves or some kind of voice in their head that's saying you're using too much or something. And it gets imposed on me. I'm a therapist. I'm not a chemical dependency professional, and so I do not care. And I have to spend a lot of time, particularly with teenagers, back to when I used to work with them, and sometimes it would just completely fail. Of just like, look, I don't care that you smoke pot. You understand? I'm not your dad. I'm not a police officer. I'm not a teacher. I'm not your drug counselor. I do not care if you smoke pot. You understand that, right? You can smoke all day, every day. I don't care. You can smoke crack. You can use heroin. I don't care. I am your therapist, which means that if you want my help with something, I'm here to help. But if you don't want my help with something and you don't identify having a problem with it, then it is not my place to say that you have a problem that you need to work on that. It is not my. Now, there's certain things that I would cross a line with, like if someone was beating their spouse or hitting their kids or something, and they weren't asking me for help with that, then I would say, you need help. I wouldn't wait for them. But if someone smoked pot, in the evening at 8 o'clock and went to the garage and listened to music every night, and they were like, yeah, it's probably not great because it costs money. It's probably not great for my lungs. And I'm a little distant from my spouse, but it's just great. I like to relax that way. I wait until all my stuff is done. I bond with my kids. They go to bed and hang out with my spouse a little bit. And then I just like to smoke weed sometimes and watch Ren and Stimpy, or whatever. And fine. I have no problem with that. There are much bigger fish to fry when it comes to improving one's life that I will advocate for, therapy in general, self-reflection in general, corrective experiences, attachment, attunement, communication, taking care of other people, saving the planet. There are much bigger fish to fry than you smoking pot every day. Like, and on the scale of substances, pot is, pretty low. Not that it can't have its negative consequences, for sure, but it's pretty minor in terms of its problems. And it's an obvious statement, and I'm not the first to say it, that if any substances should be illegal, it should be alcohol. Alcohol is incredibly destructive, and yet I drink alcohol with my friends and with my wife and stuff. And so, is it wonderful for me? Does it enhance my life? I guess I've made the decision that overall it does. Does it have its negative consequences? Absolutely. Anyone who drinks even a little bit of alcohol, it has its negative consequences. So, and, other substances, I won't go into, but, yeah, I think I'm just saying this because, one, I think people need to understand that, at least for therapists, it's not our job. And this is anecdotal, for most of us, we don't preach sobriety. It's up to you. I've had clients who I worked with them for 10 plus years, and they would have a glass or two or three of wine every single night. And we would talk about it. I'd be like, is it affecting you? But I never cared that much. Only as much as I felt it was my responsibility to explore it with the client. But I never thought in my head like, oh, they should stop that. Did I think that, of the instances, the 5 or so that are popping into my mind, that it was a factor perhaps in the negative outcomes in their life that they were trying to change? Yeah, maybe a little bit, like if you're checking out of life and you're not coping with things as from a sober perspective, if you're affecting your health in a certain way, and that causes sort of a cascade of problems. You lack energy, and then you get depressed, and then your relationships go bad because you're kind of depressed, and then you drink more to deal with the depression, and it can become a cycle. But I would never, I think there's this idea, and I think Dr. Drew actually might have helped to promote this idea, that therapists were like sobriety, and if you're not sober, there's something wrong with you, and we're going to hold you to that line. And there are some therapists that are like that, but there's a number of therapists that are more, I think, principled in their approach to people, which is to say, look, unless it's like way beyond a certain threshold, then it's if you find that your use is fine and you accept the pros and the cons, then it's literally not our job to even evaluate that, to make an internal whether we say it or not. So I just hope that, because sometimes I think that people avoid going to therapy because they're like, well, are they gonna make me stop smoking pot every night? And honestly, if you found a therapist that did that and that clashed with what you're hoping for, then I'd just find another therapist, because there's different styles out there. The other thing that I think people should think about is whatever thoughts you're imposing, you're projecting into my head, you're doing that. And think about why that is. Why have you injected thoughts into my head? This is what I do with my clients and my students. This says much more about you than it does about me. And it's not that I'm saying stop doing that. I'm saying have some self-awareness around that. It's worth exploring. Like, I've worked with people who have had that projection onto me, and I'm like, I don't have that thought. You're putting thoughts in my head. What's going on with you? Are you denying a part of yourself that is questioning your use? I'm not saying you should, but is that why you're putting that voice in my head? Anyway, Kira says, Dr. Honda would probably, so Kira was responding to Lucas, I think, in terms of, oh no, is he disappointed in me because I'm smoking pot? Kira said, Dr. Honda would probably say, if you occasionally smoke pot for relaxation and enjoyment, that's no big deal. But when you're using it as a coping mechanism to deal with stress, anxiety, or problems in your life, then it may be better to seek a therapist. Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. But I would even take a further step back. I think a big part of my attitude toward this is that in the beginning of my career, I might have had this attitude, but over time I learned that I need to be extremely almost blank when it comes to people's substance use, so that clients can feel free to explore that with me. Because people have so much shame around it, and there's very few, you're either, say you smoke pot all the time. Everyone in your life is either black or white. They're either like, I'm 100% for pot, or I'm 100% against pot. If you smoke with other pot smokers, they're going to be like, oh my God, and some pot people are just like, it's going to save the world. If we converted everything to hemp, we'd be able to, cure global warming and stuff. And they have all these kind of propaganda ideas. Anyway, or 100% against. And so I find that it's helpful if a client has someone to talk to that is neither for or against. They're just like, whatever, what do you think? Which is the way therapy should be, especially around topics like this. And so I've spent 25 years really deprogramming myself from any kind of thought about it. And the other thing is I've learned, because I talk with people intimately about all their aspects of their life, including their substance use, and I've heard it all, and not heard it all, but I've seen a lot and heard a lot of things. I even worked at a drug and alcohol treatment center for a long time and obviously all my clientele there were suffering from addiction, pretty severe addiction. And so I've seen a lot of things, and so I can't know what's really going on with someone. Even heroin use, I've learned I don't really have an opinion about it until I talk to them. It's like, how's it going? How does it play out in your life? Now, having said that, most people who are using heroin will eventually have it become a problem. It's hard to use heroin like recreationally. I don't recommend it, of course, because it can absolutely just devastate your life and your body and kill you because of overdosing, of course. But so I feel like I have to say that. It's obvious. But the point is that I learned to be extremely neutral, not only outwardly, but inwardly. Because of, I would see lots of different things. I would hear lots of different things. And I want to be a safe place where people can talk about whatever, and without worrying that I'm somehow going to, and a lot of my, shall I say, militant neutrality about this is I would have to prove myself to so many people, like, I am neutral on this. I do not care. And so I had to really become militantly neutral to really prove to people, you're safe exploring it with me. I don't care. I really don't care. You can use, you can not, as long as you're not harming other people, morally speaking, it's up to you, and you can decide for yourself, and let's explore that. So, Lucas, I hope you can know that I am militantly neutral on your pot use. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.